Okay, let's talk about healthcare and ethics and privacy. The Hippocratic Oath is best known for its do no harm clause, but it also includes a privacy statement because trust and confidentiality are extremely important in the medical profession. You want patients to tell you what has happened to you so that you can treat them appropriately. And because of that, the medical professionals, healthcare professionals, are promising that any knowledge they gain just by being a healthcare professional will stay secret, right? Never be revealed. This is a really critical piece of the ethical obligation a healthcare provider has for their patients. Now, engineers also have an ethical obligation to follow the law and follow codes of ethics, and I think the Code of Hammurabi is a very interesting example of this. The Code of Hammurabi, which is literally millennia old, was one of the first regulatory documents ever produced. And it had a punishment for an engineer who built a house that collapsed on the occupant in that house. And that punishment was death. You would literally be put to death if you built a house that collapsed and killed the occupant. And there were actually quite a few scenarios outlined. So, for example, if the house fell on a goat or something, then you, the engineer, would have to provide the owner of the house or whoever you built the house for a goat in compensation for it. So society uses laws and regulations to codify ethical standards, including security and privacy standards, for engineers who are building software systems. And it's not at all dissimilar than the sort of thing that we have outlined here in the healthcare profession. Certainly for healthcare, it's also motivating for electronic health record systems. I want to briefly mention codes of ethics because engineers cannot simply rely on the law to address all of these problems. We can't pass legal compliance problems just off to lawyers and then think that we've handled it. We have an obligation to understand the issues. Engineers, information specialists have an obligation to actually know what the law says and to be able to interpret it appropriately. And I love the way the ACM Code of Ethics put this because they say that even when you are building a system, it may be appropriate to violate the law when you know that there is an inadequate moral basis for the law or when it conflicts with some other law potentially judged to be more important. So, for example, if you're building a software system that is going to be deployed in multiple legal jurisdictions, right, say all of North America, including Canada, Mexico, etc., then you may actually have to violate one of those laws. It may not be possible for you to comply with all of them all at the same time. And even in cases where you want to comply with the law, it may be the ethically, morally correct thing to do not to comply with the law. So we need engineers to understand these, and we want to be able to provide engineers with tools that can help them understand these legal and ethical obligations. Well, healthcare is a legal domain, so we can combine our historical perspective with our ethical perspective with this legal perspective and get a little bit more in depth in what's really going on here. So most of this talk focuses on privacy laws in general, but in healthcare, which is particularly motivating, there's significant legal challenges and engineering challenges to move from a paper-based record system to an electronic health record system, which was really the original goal behind, or part of the original goal behind the HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, was to incentivize electronic health record systems because they are more efficient than paper-based systems. Now, this regulation does provide for pretty steep fines, even for non-criminal violations. I think this is the key piece. The non-criminal violations. $25,000 per violation per year is steep. And this was amended by the HITECH Act to also address data breaches, right? So it's not just a matter of processing, but also storage and making sure that we're increasing enforcement actions to providers that are violating HIPAA. These settlements are all kind of from 2014. More recent ones are kind of in the $6 to $10 million range, and we're starting to see more commonly 8-figure fines. This is actually misspelled. Let me correct that. There we go, and I'll save it. Okay. So yeah, there's money on the line too. Even if that's the only motivation, there's a lot of money on the line. All right, so I have been a Colts fan for a very long time, and let me see if I can just delete this for a second. Yeah, there we go. So I think this is a great way to explain HIPAA. It's a complicated domain. Healthcare and law generally make things complicated as soon as you start moving into them, especially for non-professionals. And since I was from Indianapolis, I was a huge Peyton Manning fan. I grew up in Indianapolis, and I had to watch quarterbacks like Jack Trudeau and Jeff George, and it was just a terrible, horrible childhood as a result of that. And when we got Peyton Manning, I was a very big fan of his. So when he had his fourth neck surgery, he was being hounded by reporters, and in the spring, in the fall, this is actually the year that he ended up missing entirely from football. When he kept getting hounded, his eventual response was this: I don't know what HIPAA stands for, but I believe in it and I practice it. And it's kind of interesting when your NFL quarterback, your hometown hero, says something like this. I don't know what HIPAA is, but I believe in it and I practice it. But this would be absolutely terrifying if a software engineer working on an electronic health record system said the same thing, wouldn't it? Right? You would want the software engineer to have a deep and nuanced understanding of what HIPAA is, what it means, and how to address it. Right? It's okay if an NFL quarterback says something like this, but we want engineers to understand the ethics and legal implications of the systems they're building, especially for things like security and privacy. All right. So there are many other privacy laws that we're not going to be able to cover in detail in this class. But I think it's worth at least covering that there are ethical implications for these laws as well. We've talked just now briefly about HIPAA. We have the GLBA, which regulates financial data. We have the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which addresses the use of children, or at least anyone under 13 years old, on the internet. We have FERPA, which stands for the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, for student records. Essentially, this is the law that makes it impossible for your parents to just call up and get your student records as a college student over 18. And then we have the Privacy Act of 1974, which mostly is regulating what the government is allowed to do with their employees. Spoiler alert for those of you who have not read it. It is essentially allowing the government to do whatever the hell they want with employees from a privacy standpoint. There are very few strict protections for government employees. Then there's a wide variety of state laws that vary in scope, coverage, and domain. And then we have the GDPR. Oh, I don't think this was saved. I updated this. We have the GDPR, which is a European Union data privacy regulation that has gone into effect. It's already in effect. This was a little bit older. And it's out there right now. And I would even add, we have the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And this last one is, I think, a little bit controversial. It's kind of passed before it was ready to be passed. So there were no strict regulations. It was sort of like an outline of what they wanted the regulatory authority to do when it was passed and it went into effect. And now everyone's sort of scrambling and wondering, what exactly does the CCPA refer to? What exactly does it actually do? Okay, so that's everything for healthcare and ethics, or at least this section of the lecture. Now we'll be moving on to talk about other technology issues related to privacy.